Hi, my name's Henry. I'm a 22-year-old man who loves drawing, game design, making videos, and animation. I feel the need to say all these things because I want to remind anyone who might be watching that I am a human with his own complexities, insecurities, and flaws, and I am more than just the work I create. That being said, today I'm going to talk about my favorite show, Steven Universe, specifically the robust fan community that has grown around it. If you haven't seen this show or aren't really familiar with its fan base, this video might spoil aspects of the show and might not make a whole lot of sense if you don't know what I'm talking about. So, sorry about that. For those who do know what I'm talking about, today I'm going to be talking about some of the recent criticisms that have been developing around the show. Stuff that you would see specifically in Tumblr tags like SU Critical or SU Criticism, and discuss some of the issues that I have against these criticisms. Though before I begin, number 1, this video is not one of those anti-Tumblr, anti-fandom, or anti-SJWs or one of those cartoons are just for kids, so stop taking it so seriously rants where I condemn the idea of fandoms being frivolous or fanatical. Number 2, this video is not going to be me defending the show as being something without flaw or something that doesn't deserve criticism, because I love this show. I love the characters, I love the art, I love how it's able to explore complex issues in a simple matter that doesn't talk down to kids, though I do recognize that this isn't a flawless show. No piece of media is without flaw. And I think understanding that gives you a greater appreciation for the stuff that you do like. And number 3, this video isn't meant to be attacking or looking down on anyone who might share these criticisms that I'm about to talk about. More on that later, because above all, this video is meant to contextualize and perhaps shed some light on some of the criticisms that are leveled, in order to promote a sense of empathy and understanding about arguments and how we discuss our media. Oh, and one last thing.
You are so good looking.
Thank you.
Okay, so to begin, I want to talk about the most prominent piece of criticism that I've been seeing lately, namely... Okay, a couple of things. So in animation, most prominently 2D animation, storyboard artists and animators are given model sheets of the characters that they are animating, in order to provide some sort of reference for their artwork. These models are usually considered the default appearance for that character. As a result, the appearance of a character in a final animation might not match the proportions, color palette, or the details of that character seen in the model, with them then being considered off-model if they are too different. Though there are a lot of factors that go into how on-model a character becomes in the final animation of the show, from what the showrunners want, budget and time constraints, and even the animation style that they use to make the show. For example, shows like Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, BoJack Horseman, and Wander Over Yonder don't utilize traditional pen and pencil animation. Instead, they utilize animation software like Toon Boom Harmony, in which they will animate a character through a digital skeleton placed on a character's image, as one would alter a CGI character or a stop-motion model. And this style of animation tends to stay completely on model most of the time because there is very little alteration that needs to be done to the character in order to properly animate them. And this is a really good way if you want to produce animation cheaply and on time. Though a problem with this style of animation is that if it's not done properly, characters' movements will appear too robotic and not lifelike enough to seem believable. If you want an idea, just look at the earliest seasons of Bob's Burgers to see what I'm talking about. Likewise, in more traditional forms of animation, such as pencil and paper, it tends to stay a lot more off-model than the other methods, but a lot of people say that this ends up making the animation look more fluid and lifelike, depending on what budget the show has. This can also be affected by how the show is written. Shows like Gravity Falls, The Simpsons, and Rugrats are animated by more traditional forms of animation, but they tend to have their scripts written ahead of time, and storyboard artists are merely just translating script notes into storyboards. But a problem that some people have with this is that it doesn't allow the artists to have enough freedom in order to create the shows the way they want. Likewise, the other major method of animating 2D animation is board-driven, where shows like Adventure Time, Regular Show, and yes, Steven Universe have rough outlines of the show written ahead of time, alongside a synopsis for each episode, but it's up to the storyboard artist to actually write most of the dialogue and the actual events of the episode. And this is good if the showrunner wants to give their artists more creative control when making episodes, with many of the styles of storyboarding being distinguishable from artist to artist. And as a result, because they are given a wider sense of freedom and variety in the show, artists tend to go off-model if they feel it helps them create. Now, this is not me saying that one style of animation is better than the other, rather than certain methods of animation serve a purpose depending on what type of show a network wants to create. Whether you fall on the board-driven or script-driven side of animation, many of the creators at Cartoon Network, including Rebecca Sugar, prefer to utilize board-driven shows. But if this is a normal method of animation that is utilized by other shows, why are people so angry about Steven Universe? Generally, board-driven shows tend to be a lot less realistic and more cartoony compared to other forms of animation. This is because it allows the cartoonist to have a lot more creative control. Though because a majority of the characters in Steven Universe are semi-realistic humanoids, a character going off-model tends to delve into the uncanny valley for certain viewers who notice them, especially since Steven Universe, despite all of its magical elements, tries to keep its ideas and writing at a somewhat realistic level, often touching up on very real issues that we face in the world. Though the thing about animation is that the artists that work on it are often forced by both the show's budget and deadlines to try and finish their storyboards in as short a time span as possible, which is something compounded if it's for an animated TV show, where budgets and schedules are a lot smaller than a big feature animated movie. Fixing many of these instances of characters going off model takes a lot of time and money, two things that you do not want to run out of when it comes to animation. And while doing it might make the characters look a little more consistent, it would lead the show to be on hiatus for longer periods of time. So while it's fun to laugh at these sort of instances of going off model, treating it like it's a sign that the show's animation quality is degrading, or that the storyboard artist and animators aren't putting enough effort into the show, feels a tad unreasonable, especially since these characters going off model doesn't have much final influence on how the character or the show is presented. Which leads me to... Okay, this is a little more difficult to communicate because this is something that is extremely subjective for the viewer. Though the basic complaints regarding character development centers around Lapis and Peridot. Many feel that there is not enough focus being placed on the characters. Peridot used to be a villain completely loyal to Homeworld who has now betrayed them and is learning about Earth, still fumbling on certain subjects like fusion and their relationship to humans. Lapis was not only a victim of being fused with Malachite, but she was also fused in a mirror for thousands of years and is also having to come to terms with her new life, and seemingly coming to terms with the people that imprisoned her for thousands of years. This is also something compounded by the fact that we still don't know a whole lot about who she was before she was in the mirror, or how she felt about the rebellion, the crystal gems, fusion, etc. These are lingering questions for many, which is why many are angered that the show has shifted focus away from these characters in order to put more focus on the main crystal gems. For many, it feels as though these characters have undergone some sort of development off-screen in order to make more room for the other characters, which is something that I understand. It can be frustrating to see your favorite character not receive as much attention as you would have wanted, especially if they are characters that many seem to identify with in some way. Though I find myself wondering why this doesn't bother me, when it's clearly an issue for others. I know that Lapis and Peridot aren't my favorite characters, but I really enjoyed seeing how they have progressed, particularly in episodes like Too Short to Ride, Alone at Sea, and Room for Ruby. I guess it's because I'm just waiting to see how these characters are going to change in the future episodes. Part of me feels like the reason they don't put as much time and focus on the character's development as some would want is that they probably want to make sure that they give all their different characters a fair amount of time. One of the problems with animated TV shows is how difficult it is to tell long-form stories with multiple characters over the span of multiple seasons. TV is a very fragile medium that is very dependent on ratings and network control. If a show is not fulfilling certain expectations, they can easily cancel it, no matter how much of an audience that it is amassing. Just look back on the treatment of shows like Wander Over Yonder and Young Justice. These were shows that had bigger plans for its overarching story, but because they had to end their story prematurely, they had to try and create the best conclusion they could have under those circumstances. And while I don't think Steven Universe is in this situation, this is a reality that many show creators have to compromise on when it comes to making something. So, while it is perfectly okay to feel that certain characters are not given the focus that you think they deserve, I think it's important to remember that we still have at least 2 more seasons greenlit, and there is very little indication that future seasons would be denied by Cartoon Network. So, chances are, these issues might be addressed in the future. Which is also the case for issues like... and... Again, this is something that is extremely subjective, given how certain episodes are considered filler while some are not. The blue object that's in the moon base, the origins of Pink Diamond, whose centipede it was, why Peridot hasn't gotten her limb enhancers back. I feel that these issues will probably be revealed or discussed in the future. And given how Steven Universe utilizes a heavy combination of lore-intensive elements and lighthearted humor, the Crewniverse probably doesn't want to blow their load on every single secret in the show, lest there be a harsh imbalance between the human elements of the show and the gem elements. Now, I could be completely wrong and they might not bring up these subjects ever again, but I feel like this is something that we'll have to just give it some time and see how the show plays out before we can complain. And then there's an even more piece of difficult criticism. This one is really difficult to discuss properly, so a couple of caveats. First being, I believe that in our increasingly globalized and diverse world, it is important that we are exposed to, particularly in our media, a wider set of represented people. The more we are exposed to different races, religions, sexualities, gender identities, and economic backgrounds, the more informed and empathetic we become as a broader culture, which I believe will be a net positive for future generations. That being said, some of the criticisms surrounding representation puzzle me. Many people believe that while the show is certainly progressive in its portrayal of the LGBT community, some people feel that it vilifies and misrepresents certain peoples. Many people take issue with the gems being considered genderless despite them taking on clearly female personas and pronouns. Many people also feel that Bismuth and Sugalite, 2 characters that are clearly coded to be black based off of their voice actresses and their designs, are vilified to the point where it reinforces negative stereotypes and tropes surrounding black people. And many feel that it doesn't properly represent platonic friendships, asexual people, trans people, and other groups of people not immediately presented. Though some people refute this by pointing out how many barriers this show has broken in its runtime, being the first Cartoon Network show created by a woman, an outed bisexual woman at that, how it has many people on the LGBT spectrum in its production team, and how it has characters like the Pizza family and the Maheshwarans being representative of Ghanaian and Indian people respectively, when it could have easily been casted as white. And how a majority of the characters are not only female or female model, but they are queer on some level. If you want an idea of how Steven Universe compares to other pieces of media with queer characters, I recommend that you watch this review that shows the LGBT themes created by Rantasmo. Steven Universe needs more gay. I'll put a link in the description. That being said, despite the fact that I feel that this show is far more representative than most other shows on television, I do not want to completely discount these pieces of criticism, because again, I think that it is important that we do have more positive representation of different people in our media, and I do think it is important that we point out such flaws in even the most positive pieces of work. Though I do think that saying, this show doesn't do X well, and therefore it's not a progressive show, feels a little too reductionist, and discounts the other areas of the show that do bring out positive representations of groups that some might not have been exposed to. I know that statement is a bit of a straw man, but the point I want to encourage is that, while by all means you are within your rights to point out areas of the show that you feel aren't representative enough, and rightly so, I want to warn against completely writing off what the show does because of what it doesn't do. Which brings me to what I feel is the most unreasonable piece of criticism, and the reason why I'm making this video. So the thing about these previous pieces of criticism is that they are all completely subjective viewpoints. I feel like I can't emphasize this enough. If you agree to any of these previously mentioned criticism, that's your prerogative. You are well within your rights to not like the writing, the art design, or its views on representation. Though within this bed of criticism, I have been noticing a growing sense of resentment towards the show production team for not addressing their complaints, to the point where some think that because they aren't listening to their criticisms, that the show is diminishing in quality. Like I said before, yes, it is disappointing when something doesn't fulfill your expectations, and the desire to see something fixed is understandable. Though here's the thing, as a consumer of media, you do not have a say of how a creator makes their media. You may really like Steven Universe, you may contribute to the fanbase, and you may even support the show by watching it when it airs or buying the merchandise. But even if you are the most hardcore fan of Steven Universe, this does not entitle the creators of the show to listen to you. You can disagree at how they run things, but ultimately, they are the final authority on how a show is created, and there isn't anything you can do about that. I know this isn't what some people want to hear, but I think that because we live in an age where we can communicate with media creators easily through social media, and that people have been able to voice their criticism in a way that millions of people can see, it has become too easy to forget that once you consume a piece of media, be it watch a movie or TV show, read a book, or play a game, your role in the transaction between a creator and a consumer is done. And creators by all means can listen to the criticisms from its fans, but if they were to do so, it would be because they agree with that criticism and would want to change it. But if they feel that the suggested changes conflict with their overall creative vision of the show, they are well within their rights to not do anything. So while I think that these pieces of criticism are reasonable to varying degrees, I draw the line when people begin to vilify and harass the show creators because they don't agree with the creative decision. Doing so implies that you know more about creating a piece of media than the people who are literally creating a piece of media. Being able to create a show like Steven Universe is not an easy feat. Considering all the moving parts that it takes to create something like a TV show, it's a miracle anytime that something ends up being phenomenal the way Steven Universe is. And yes, there is stuff that I don't agree with when it comes to show creators, but I realize there really isn't anything I can do about it. Now, I'm not saying that you have to like this show for all of its flaws and see it as a flawless piece of media. Again, no piece of media is flawless, but I do think that there needs to be some more perspective when it comes to how we analyze this TV show. By all means, keep redesigning those characters, keep changing the color palette, keep saying how you think this show should change. But being so critical of the show to the point where you're being hostile to the creators of the show and other fans doesn't actually help your criticism. It only makes the community more hostile and toxic for those wanting to join. Because I know many of these criticisms come out of love for the show. But I need to ask, with the show that has so much emphasis on love and trust and empathy, shouldn't we also convey that same amount of love and trust and empathy? That's up for you to decide. I know I can only speak for myself, and I know that people will still disagree with what I have to say. But I hope going forward that everyone watching this video will help perpetuate this idea of love, empathy, and understanding that the show constantly reminds us of. Because for me, this sense of optimism and understanding is what makes this my favorite show and my favorite community to interact with. And I hope that's something that never goes away. I hope that's something you think too. Thank you for watching. Best wishes. If you're evil and you're on the rise, you can count on the four of us taking you down. Cause we're good and evil never beats us. We'll win the fight and then go out for pizzas. We are the Crystal Gems. We'll always save the day. And if you think we can, we'll always find a way. That's why the people of this world believe in Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl and Steven.